When I try to imagine the call of Matthew the tax collector, I find myself thinking of the famous painting by Caravaggio in the church of San Luigi dei Francesi in Rome. In this much reproduced painting, much celebrated painting, Caravaggio portrays Jesus pointing at Matthew, whose head is down, who clearly has worked out that he has been chosen and called, and who looks deeply shocked and troubled at this. Of course, Caravaggio is using a certain amount of invention here. After all, the Gospel of Matthew says, "And he rose and followed him." But in any case, back to the picture. Beside him sits another, also pointing at Matthew, as if to make absolutely sure at whom Jesus is pointing. Is it really this fellow here who is chosen and called? Or is it someone else in this general direction? These questions raise further questions. Why him? Why this presumably undeserving man who does not seem to want the gift of being chosen by Christ? Why not the man beside him? Why not the baby-faced dandy with the fancy hat, or the elderly man scrutinizing the money on the table? Why Matthew? Why this one and not that one? The scope of this question can be extended much wider. Why Abraham and not Lot? Why Sarah and not Hagar? Why Israel and not Canaan, Babylon, or Egypt? Indeed, very much without wishing to be presumptuous. Why you or me, who on the surface at least would seem to have responded sufficiently to the call of Christ, either to be at this Mass right now or tuning in? In all this, we have in us the interaction of, on the one hand, our wholly inadequate understanding of our loving God, and on the other hand, there might be working in us, responding in us, reacting in us, our human sense of justice and fairness. When we remember that God is wholly free, and we then focus on God's freedom, the choice of this person rather than that person might well strike us as a bit unfair or even arbitrary, like a raffle in which God's hand happened to pick Matthew's lucky ticket from the pot and not that of another. But the God who is wholly free is also the God who is wholly wise and who knows all things. So our God is wholly free, who is wholly free is not an arbitrary or a random God, quite the contrary. These are, of course, there are very deep issues here. And since human freedom, let alone divine freedom, gives us more than enough to be puzzled by, let me simply make a few points. First of all, why assume that the others, Matthew's friends, were not also called in different ways in their lives, perhaps more subtle, less dramatic ways? After all, the Spirit blows where it wills, and many beautiful things can take place in the secrecy of the human heart. And just as important, why think that in the very act itself of calling Matthew, that Christ did not also show great love for those beside him? And strange though it might seem, given how long ago it was, that in the very same act of calling Matthew, God might also have shown love for even you and me. For in waking Matthew from his spiritual slumber, he woke him up to spread the good news. In choosing Matthew, he chose one who, according to the tradition, played a major role in the writing of the gospel, a passage from which we have heard today. So we are among the many, many millions of beneficiaries of the calling of Matthew 2,000 years ago. Just as the call of the people of Israel was not only for their salvation, but ultimately for the salvation that reaches out to all humanity, so the call of pretty much any of our brothers or sisters may also be understood as an act of God that can contribute to the building up of the kingdom, that God touches a heart not only for the sake of the person in question, but also so that he or she may be a light to our world an ambassador for Christ to those whom they will meet. We all have our part to play, but there is ultimately one great drama of salvation and one great playwright. In spite of all its twists and turns, it is a drama that involves you and me and our responses, and a drama that involves divine freedom, divine wisdom, and a divine love that reaches out at the very same time to you, to me, to Matthew the tax collector, and to all humanity. The closing verses from the Gospel of Matthew. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teach them to observe all that I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always to the close of the age.